what is that person actually saying? What is the message they're trying to convey? Because obviously, we're in a world at the moment where PR is very strong, especially in the world of sports journalism, and every club is very much has its own PR initiative, has its own PR agenda, and they are always thinking about conveying the message that they want to relay and making themselves look the best they possibly can, and they'll be the first to admit that, sure. So.
Yeah, I mean, every club does it right. I mean, Spurs definitely has a reputation for maybe being more tight-lipped or being more controlled in that regard than most. But you mentioned earlier, you focus on clubs where you have good information, you have good, you've got a good reputation with, and you've got that trust. But do you worry when you're reporting in a manner that the club itself or whoever has shared information with you might not like, that you worry that your relationship with them going forward may suffer as a result? How do you reconcile that?
Yeah, it's always something that you have to think about. But as I said, it's not a journalist's job to be a megaphone for a club or a megaphone for an individual. And I think you have to be willing to risk that. You have to be willing to put that on the line sometimes. But it's hard to know whether it really is on the line, because it's a matter of trust, as you say. It's a matter of having a good relationship, and it's a matter of both sides of the party understanding that, without going into any more detail. And so it's always my responsibility to be thinking about, looking beyond what people are actually saying and whether there is an agenda there, and whether there is something that they're looking to do, and it's very much not in my interest to be pushing somebody else's agenda, and it's part of my job to be able to see through that. And if that's going on, then that's something that we have to think about at Sky. And so it's something we are very aware of. We are aware that sometimes people are reporting things that we aren't, and that might fall under the category of what you just talked about.
Well, I love your work, and you've got a very, very tough job. I think far more challenging than most would like to admit. Switching gears a little bit, and our friend, your friend as well, Paul O'Keefe, asked us a great question last week, and he said, Franco Baldini, villain or scapegoat? And I'd love for you to address that question, but I'd also love for you to talk about the overall setup in terms of human resources that we used for the window. Who were the leaders? What were the individual roles? Mitchell, Baldini, Levy, and others. I'd love for you to touch on this.
Mm-hmm. Well, obviously, as you know, Tottenham have changed their transfer strategy over the last 12 months. They've the poor recruitment that went on in 2013 hasn't gone unnoticed with the supporters, and supporters should be assured that it hasn't gone unnoticed with the club either. There's no way that Daniel Levy has not noticed that it hasn't worked out. That there was a lot of work put into that particular recruitment drive. A lot of money was spent on it, on some big names as well, and some big names that they thought were going to be successful, but they haven't been. So part of what Tottenham have been doing since they hired Pochettino just over a year ago is redressing the way that they recruit players and the way that they scout players. And obviously that has been a work in progress since they've started. So, as much as it's been a decision to change the recruitment strategy, it's also been a decision to see how things get on in the first 6 months or so. So they obviously made a decision to hire Paul Mitchell from Southampton, which happened just before Christmas last year.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't start work in earnest really until January time. And during the January transfer window, he was, I guess you could say, on the periphery of things, and really finding his feet, I guess is the way to describe it. Getting his feet under the table, learning the way the club works, learning who's who and who are the powerful influences of the club and who aren't, and his position there really, and how seriously or not seriously he may be taken. And that's really what the first 6 months to 8 months of his working time has been spent doing. So I think in the January transfer window we definitely saw that. Franco Baldini was involved in January, as far as I understand it, and a number of particular players were looked at, but ultimately it was decided that they weren't the right players, and I think that was based on the advice of the newcomer of Paul Mitchell.
Lyall, what do you think Franco's responsibilities have been just this year with Mitchell's arrival?
Well, the way I understand it is that Franco's been responsible for getting rid of the players that he brought in that haven't been unsuccessful.
Yep.
That's the way I've understood it. That's the information that's been brought to me, is that he's been responsible for finding other clubs for the players that the club no longer wants. And I can safely say that he has not been involved in any of the incoming signings on a one-to-one personal level. He's not been involved in that. It's very much been Daniel Levy and Paul Mitchell and Mauricio involved in various conversations and a number of meetings, some with players, some without players. It's very much been them three
I see.
that have been involved in bringing the players in. And Franco's expected to leave the club shortly.
Very interesting.
I think that's a good segue to talk about the recent window, since it just closed on Tuesday. And I don't think anyone that was a Spurs fan was unaware of what was going on with the social media meltdown as the window slowly ticked to closing. So in your article, you claimed that the club didn't act late in going in for Berahino, and that the timing of approaching West Brom was really a function of the club failing in their other targets. Mm-hmm. So if that's the case, who do you think our number one target at centre forward was?
Well, the number one target at centre forward was Danny Ings. He was the player that the club really, really wanted to get. He was the one that they saw was direct competition for Harry Kane. They thought he had a big future, and he really was somebody they wanted to get. And the club acted. I would go as far as to say the club acted slightly out of character actually to get him at that particular point, because they were willing to actually pay money for a player that was imminently going to become a free transfer, just to be able to speak to Danny. So they bid for Danny £12 million, which obviously allowed the club to speak to him, because Burnley accepted that bid. And Daniel Levy and Paul Mitchell and Mauricio Pochettino actually had a meeting with Danny Ings, and they sat down with him and his agent, and they had a conversation about trying to bring him to Tottenham. And unfortunately that wasn't successful. And he'd already decided that he wanted to go to Liverpool. There was some suspicions, as far as I understand it, in Danny Ings' mind as well about joining Tottenham, given some players that had been there over the last few years and their careers hadn't perhaps moved forward in the way that they wanted to. As I mentioned in the article, there's obviously a few players at Spurs that were highly rated before they went there, and they're no longer highly rated now. So I think a number of players are suspicious about moving there, and Danny Ings was definitely one of them. So unfortunately they missed out on Danny. And personally, from a point of view, I think he would have been a very, very good signing.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of people that were really looking forward to the possibility of having him in Lily White. And speaking of that, shortly after the transfer window closed, Pochettino and Levy both came out and made statements about the transfer policy, the window activity. Do you think that the statements that they made were truly necessary? And do you believe that their explanations, particularly from Pochettino, about it was Berahino or bust, were accurate?
I'm not sure I read it in the same way as it being Berahino or bust. I mean, I think from being in Pochettino's press conferences and obviously, knowing the information that I do, I don't think that Pochettino or the club necessarily thought of Berahino that way, that it was Berahino or bust. I think the club are quite prepared to wait for the right target to come along, and they're quite prepared to wait to go back in for Berahino in January. If that's a viable option, they're quite prepared to do that. And they certainly won't be held to ransom by one particular chairman who was very much the only person around the negotiating table that wasn't willing really to do a deal at that point. He'd already decided as a matter of principle, as the way I understand it, that Berahino was not going to be left, and was ignoring the advice of people even within his own club at that point. So
yeah, because it left us scratching our heads too, because they have 6 center forwards on that team, and they need defensive help, and we were thinking that we were going to package one of our expendable defensive back line players, along with maybe some money, to get Berahino, and nothing would it made no sense to the layperson that's just sitting back watching this thing unfold, and it leaves you scratching your head.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, obviously it's very difficult as a journalist to be in a position before a deal or while a deal's being talked about to actually say whether something's going to happen or not. I mean, I find myself getting a lot of questions on social media about do I personally think whether this is going to happen or not, and I know all too well the way the transfer business works and how difficult it is and how uncertain it is, even to the point where, like I said, everybody around the negotiating table, apart from one person, is expecting a deal to happen, and one person is saying no. If you understand the position of the journalists, they could be getting the information from various people at the same time, but we're not always assured that it's going to happen, because all it takes is that one person to say, no, I'm sorry, I don't want to sell this player, and that's very much the way that it happened. It was very much that Jeremy Peace decided personally, and unfortunately he happened to be the one person that had to sign off on the deal. He was the one that said, no, the deal's not right for me.
And it seems like that happens a lot. I know that Sam did a lot of work, just independently and for the podcast, looking into the transfer window, and I swear I thought we were going to need to give him a lobotomy by the time this thing was winding down.
You probably should have.
It was so stressful for him, because nothing made sense. It just did not make sense as to how things were happening. But he was very accurate on saleability of players and what we were going to get for them, and I think your numbers came really close, Sam, so I was really impressed with that.
I thought Franco did a pretty good job. Hey, a quick step back, because we talked about it, but we haven't formally mentioned it. Very timely that we have Lyall on. But Lyall, you published a very, very interesting article yesterday in the Tottenham and Wood Green Independent. It's titled "Tottenham's Transfer Window is Far from a Disaster. Daniel Levy appears to have changed." It probably won't be. Well, I think it'll be a very popular article. It's a great story. It may not be popular from the standpoint that it doesn't fit into a lot of people's agenda, right? But it's a great article, and it's been the basis of a number of conversations, and it's food for thought. And it's not really a story that's been bandied about by a lot of people. But I think we do have. I mean, it was a bit of a surprise to us. I mean, I've been pretty vocal. I'm moaning about how late we've been, right, on stuff. But you've pointed out, hey, look, well, no, there was a logical progression. We went to Ings, we sent a contingency over to Germany, we wanted Timo Werner, and then we got down to Berahino because we had exhausted the other options. But I never heard we put a formal bid in for Werner. Did we? We did.
As far as I understand it, a formal bid was not put in for Werner. No.
Why was?
Because if you understand the way that it works, is obviously conversations happen between clubs, not directly, but they happen indirectly. So clubs obviously have people that work for them, as well as players do. So agents don't just work on behalf of players; they also work on behalf of clubs. So to give you an insight into how it really, really works and the kind of conversations that goes on, it really is an open dialogue. So there'll be people speaking, on behalf of Tottenham. There'll be people speaking on behalf of Stuttgart. They'll be having conversations with each other and then relaying that information back. And that really that really gives the club the sense of whether they're in a position where they can actually open formal conversations or not. So if for example Tottenham want to sign a player from Stuttgart, it doesn't just involve Daniel Levy making a phone call to Stuttgart's chief executive or Stuttgart's chairman. Very much there'll be a process that goes on where both chairmen will understand the club's positions, and then once it gets to a point where they think, well, a deal can be done, then a conversation will be had, because you have to understand, there's only one chairman at both clubs, so it's not an effective use of time if you're calling everybody under the sun. And there's very much it's a matter of principle, and it's also a matter of face at the same time. So you don't want to be calling up another club to ask about a player when you know full well there's no chance of you getting him. It's just a waste of your time and a waste of your integrity, if you see what I mean. So these conversations obviously they took place, and it was established by Spurs at some point in the window that a deal for Timo Werner would not be able to happen. So it didn't happen.
But I guess where I get a little tripped up is the fact that, okay, so they've said, look, he's not for sale. But we were told the same, right, about Berahino by Peace. Yet we still forced the issue. And I was just, it's confused me a little. Whereas, so clearly, as you said, there wasn't a deal to be done for Werner. It really, as we look